Good morning. Thank you all for being here and coming to our talk this early in the morning. Our talk is about games as a service. Let's see how this works. My name is Robin Meyer. I'm a producer at Ranamo Games, and I'm doing this talk together with Joost van Dongen, who's down there in the dark somewhere. He's our lead programmer and our co-founder, and we're both from Ranamo Games, which is a small Dutch independent development studio. And we've been around for 9 years now. This is our team. These people are a lot more like family to me than just being colleagues. And together we made a game called Awesomenauts, which is a 2D side-scrolling multiplayer game that actually came out in Steam in 2012. Including time spent on it ahead of launch. That means we've been working on it for 7 years now. And we've been supporting it for more than 4. And we've been in business thanks to the games as a service business model. And that's going to be, our experience with that is going to be the topic of this talk. Before we really dive into our experiences, I just want to talk a bit about what the games as a service model actually is and why we're so happy that we chose to go with that. And then I'll walk you through some of our experiences that we've had since 2012. And after that, Joost is going to walk you through like the actual patch process that we use. When you launch your game, the way I see it, you basically have 3 different choices to go for. You can either make a sequel based on what made your game do well and try to make it bigger and better. You can make another game if you don't want to stick with what you were doing. Or you can go for the games as a service model. And doing that means sticking with the game you launched and expanding on it and trying to turn it into the game you always envisioned. I truly believe this can work for almost any game that's out there, but it has a more natural fit in case your game has some sort of endless replayability, so players can stick around for a very long time without you constantly needing to churn out content. It really helps if you have a way to generate revenue from your players beyond the point of their initial purchase, because that just keeps you in business for longer. And it also really helps if you can expand upon your game with some meaningful content. If you have a really closed-off, story-driven experience, it's not that easy to keep making more content for it. And all these things hold true for Awesomenauts. We've been releasing a lot of content for it over the years, and we've been doing that with 2 very core principles in mind. The first of these is putting our player count, our active player count, above the need for immediate revenue. We're very happy to get more players into it if that means doing a very steep sale. And because of that, we've been participating in a lot of Humble Bundles and stuff like that, or doing really steep Steam sales, because as we get more players into the game, it vastly improves the matchmaking experience. And that, in turn, creates for a much better game experience, which, in turn, will keep more players invested, give them much more reason to play. And at some point in this process, we're bound to make some revenue based off of post-release purchases, like DLC or skins and stuff like that. And the other pillar is keeping the game fresh by constantly releasing meaningful content for our players. This, again, gives them a reason for coming back, and it also really keeps them involved and excited for it. The reason why we're so happy that we chose games as a service rather than doing a different project entirely mainly has to do with the fact that it's really cool to work on a live game. Everything we do, everything we start to develop, could potentially be out a few months from now. And that means players will be enjoying it and we'll be getting a lot of positive feedback. And that is just vastly much more fun than shipping your game, enjoying the hype for a few months, then closing the door, shutting the blinds, and going dark for another 2 years. It also really allowed us to get much closer to our original vision for Awesomenauts. I think, as Nathaniel Blue mentioned in his 201 talk yesterday, one of the advices they had was developing your game within the scope is actually achievable for you. And I honestly think almost no developer can truly realize the game they envisioned before launch just because of a whole bunch of constraints. Expanding on your game beyond launch makes that much more possible. And even 4 years after launching Awesomenauts, we're still not really at the point where we can say, like, this is the best thing we ever envisioned for it. Also, traditionally, long-term support for a game has been a AAA affair. But thanks to a lot of features on Steam, it's actually something that's achievable for smaller studios like ours. We're just 15 people working on it, and it's been going really well for us. So all in all, long-term support for your game is actually a lot of fun. And what that means in terms of the financial status for our company, after launch, we've been selling a lot of content, a lot of DLC, and a lot of games. But in the years beyond our first year, we actually raised almost 69% of our total revenue. Compare that to most games for which everything beyond the first year is usually just a small part of their total revenue stream. But if you go for games as a service, it's a lot more viable to keep it up for a longer time. Also, the way we've been doing the game on Steam has actually allowed us to get a lot more revenue outside of Steam, consoles, for instance. And that way, over the years, we've sold over 2 million copies by now. So now I'll walk you through the process of Awesomenauts more or less chronologically since launch, and talk about some of the highs and lows that we've had since then. So starting right at the beginning, Awesomenauts launched on August 1st in 2012. And it did really well at that point, which was kind of a godsend for us as we were going through some hard times with our team. And the game did well. It was very warmly received, and it actually immediately exceeded our expectations. And I think one of the things that really worked well for us was the thing that we promised to deliver more content post-launch. And we made sure that we were actually able to deliver on that promise. Sorry. If you've ever launched the game, you've probably noticed that you've spent weeks or perhaps even months after launch dealing with issues that came up right at launch, like bugs or gameplay issues that you didn't see coming. But unfortunately, you may have also realized that players take bug fixes like that for granted. The only thing they get really, truly excited about is new content. And so we wanted to make sure we could deliver on that. The way we did that was actually making sure the content was already done at launch. That's not something players usually like to hear, that you create content and hold it back. But for us, it was the only way to actually ensure that we could deliver on our promise to bring them more content. And once the chaos that followed our launch kind of subsided, we were able to pick up more content again and keep it going. So if you're ever considering doing games as a service, I truly recommend that you make the promise of doing more content an essential part of your pitch to players, but also really ensure that you can deliver on it. And that, unfortunately, that does mean probably finishing the content ahead of launch. A month later, we shipped an update that contained the very first bits of DLC for the game. They were 9 costumes, 9 skins for our characters. And that started the process of actually generating revenue from players beyond the initial sale. As you can see in this chart, since August 2014 and the 2 years that followed, DLC has made up more than half of our revenue stream, and that's kind of split evenly between cosmetic DLC and some gameplay-relevant DLC, which in our case is more characters. And as we've been releasing more and more DLC, the share that was bringing in terms of revenue has been growing. One thing that really surprised us is that even now players usually, when they buy skins, they usually talk about it in terms of supporting us rather than feeling obligated or anything to buy it. And that, to us, gives us like a signal that we have a lot of goodwill with them, and it also they don't feel cheated out of content in a way. For the gameplay relevant content, it's a little bit more mixed. And sometimes players do really feel that we're somehow keeping content from them. But in the end, there is a trade-off that we need to make there. And the DLC that we sell really helps us keep in business and ensures more content's coming in the future. As some of the other talks have already pointed out, you really need to experiment with the content and price points of what you're doing beyond launch. And investing or taking maybe a loss for granted there can really give you a lot of data that helps you better tune your offerings further down the line. About a year after launch, in June, we started getting a better feel for our community. We had been talking to them a lot, of course, but we were really getting the idea of what made them tick and what they were getting excited about. And at that point, we started teasing new content by giving them some really cryptic hints or sending some horribly distorted images. And we were really surprised to see how incredibly excited players were to be presented with riddles like this. The content was, at that point, probably weeks away. They didn't know what was coming up, but they really wanted to know. And our forums kind of exploded with hype around this. This was a really important lesson for us in terms of communicating with the most hardcore fans. Because these players, your most hardcore community, will probably find every bit of information you share with them, and they'll discuss it. If there's anything to discuss for it, they'll discuss it at length. And this created a lot of buzz within our community, a lot of hype. Exactly a year after launch, we started doing a Kickstarter campaign. And the reason we did that was actually because we were facing a couple of issues. We had been shipping content as soon as it was ready, doing 2 or 3 patches a month occasionally. And as hard as we were trying, we realized it was not really bringing a lot of players back to the game. We were getting a lot of exposure through external forces. We got a lot of players in through Steam sales, a Humble Bundle, and we did a couple of cooperations with YouTubers, and that worked extremely well. Unfortunately, whatever we could do ourselves was not really getting the results we were hoping for. We were facing a growing number of dormant players, which are players that own your game but are not actively playing it. And that means we're also not in any way, they're not adding to the community, they're not adding to the matchmaking pool. We're not generating any revenue from them at all, which is kind of a secondary objective, but they're not contributing in any way to the success of our game. And that was worrying, because all those external forces were things we could not control directly. And if we wanted to invest in the long-term future of Awesomenauts, we really had to get a grip on what was going on there. Also, players were not really aware of what was coming up. They may have heard some things, know we were working on a new character, but they had no idea what they could expect, like in the next year or the next 2 years. And we did a Kickstarter campaign that was completely focused on sharing that long-term vision and selling, in a way, the future of Awesomenauts to them. We called this Awesomenauts Starstorm. It's like an expansion pack. And it included a couple of playable characters and a lot of additional content that was going to be released for free. The campaign turned into a massive success. We got about, including our Slacker-backer campaign, we raised over $500,000 for it with a goal of 125. And what we noticed, as soon as we shared this long-term vision for our game, players got incredibly excited. The narrative we were talking about and what we wanted to achieve was very close to what they wanted to see the game achieve as well. And players got really excited for it. They signed up for it, and they really helped us realize the future of Awesomenauts that way. We don't actually see a lot of games that take a similar approach and do a crowdfunding campaign to realize like the next level vision of their game. I know Skullgirls does something similar, and it was also a massive success for them. And I honestly can't think of any other game that tried to do something like this. And if you're ever considering doing games as a service, or if you're already running games as a service and have an established community, I truly believe this is something worth looking into, because your players, if they're excited about your future of your game, they can help you realize it. Unfortunately, not everything went well. The campaign itself was really ambitious for us, and we made a lot of promises in terms of features that we were bringing to the game. Now, 3 years on, we still have not delivered on all of those, just because as we move on, not everything makes a lot of sense to put it on our development calendar immediately. We're a small team and have very limited resources in actually making things like this happen. But every time we ship something that's not one of these features that we promised, players are kind of frustrated, and rightly so, of course. So making promises has been something that kind of came to haunt us. Of course, we're still delivering on these promises eventually, but it's not quite as easy in practice. So what we realized is that the more you talk about your vision, the more it actually excites your players, but making concrete promises will probably come back to haunt you. Ever since we did this campaign, we've also tried to be as open as we can about what we've been working on and what we were going for. And that has very rarely come back to haunt us. It's just making concrete promises that usually doesn't work out. So the campaign did well, and Awesomenauts went back up, basically, because of the buzz that surrounded our campaign. And in March 2014, we launched the game on PlayStation 4. As some of you probably experienced at some point, releasing a game on console is a lot harder than it is on Steam, and also keeping it supported is a whole different league entirely. It's something Joost is going to talk about a little later. But it's worth knowing that doing the game on consoles has actually been a really valuable experience for us. It's been very successful as well. And it's been completely enabled by the fact that it's something that we can support on Steam and then bring to consoles. Probably if we only were doing consoles at this time, it would not have been something we were able to achieve. About 2 years ago, with the previous Steam Dev Days, we were both sitting in a hall, I think on the 6th floor that way. We were listening to a talk by Robin Walker. It's called Communication and Community in Games as a Service. And it kind of opened our eyes to a potential solution for the issue we were facing. We were still doing a lot of updates, and we were still having issues with bringing players back into the fold. And the talk that Robin Walker did was basically about how they achieved this with Team Fortress 2. And it all boils down to bundling updates into a bigger content package and building a narrative around it. Making it something that moves way beyond simply an update being patch notes, but being something that players can discuss and get excited about and look forward to, and basically engaging your community with upcoming content rather than just shipping it and be done with it. So at that point, we started bundling some of our updates to one. Rather than doing an update every 2 or 3 weeks, we started doing updates every 2 or 3 months and bundling the same content that we were doing into a bigger package. That was actually a lot easier for us because doing updates does take a lot of time. And it really allowed us to polish up the content and make it more of an exciting package for them. We were already doing teases, but we started doing it on a much bigger scale. And for that, we created something called Voltar's Vault, which is a reference to like a mysterious in-game character. And we made a website that contained a list of all the upcoming content for an update. But every bit was being teased for a few days and then revealed. And for weeks on end, this kept the community engaged and excited for what was coming up. These are some of the examples that we have. We gave updates names like Seismic Shift or Whitehawk Down, Secret to Space, Eye of the Storm, just some really cool sounding ideas that have some connection to the game. And we started posting images like these distorted images. Every day we'd distort the image a little less, and players would get a little bit more of an idea what we were selling them. Or simply giving them cryptic images. The one at the bottom right, for instance, is a cleanup for one of our characters, and basically making him a cleaner, more straightforward character. Most of these things were eventually guessed by players, but we were looking at threads of over 200 pages in just a few days. The buzz this generated in our community really helped spread the word. And it got players informed about what was coming up, and it actually helped us bring back players. The 2.3 update that you can see on the right is the first update that we did like this, and for the very first time, without any external support like coverage or sales, we were seeing players coming back, players being really excited about what was going on. And this approach is something that we've been sticking with ever since. Aside from selling this to existing players were already excited about what we were doing, this all revolved around bringing back those dormant players and giving them a reason for coming back. If you're giving your players a small update, they might hear about it and go like, but if you're shipping content every 2 or 3 months, and they hear about what's coming up and what you've added to the game at one point, they're probably going to be excited and willing to try it out again. Also, we've been reaching out to players as much as we can, and for that we're also using like the Steam events, Steam announcements, and things like that. And we've seen that usually these are pretty effective, especially if you provide players with an incentive for actually signing up for following your game on Steam. We recently added a skin to the game that you get by actually signing up for the Community Hub and following the game on Steam. And within a week, we've seen our player numbers double in that group. And that means that all the communication we're already doing are now twice as effective at bringing players back. So like I said, we continue to do updates this way. And in December 2015, we were kind of back at the problem that we originally had. The updates we were doing were having smaller impacts over time, and press was not covering us at all, because at that point we were a game that was about 3.5 years old. So we decided to take this process one step further and bundle updates even more. And that resulted in a second expansion for Awesomenauts called Awesomenauts Overdrive. This is kind of distinct from the Starstorm campaign, because at this point we simply bundled the content that we've already planned for this next 6 or 9 months, and tell players like this is what's coming up, and we're going to call it Starstorm Overdrive, and it's going to consist of like 3 or 4 updates. And simply by again rebranding the content that we were already doing, we were able to finally get more press coverage again. The press picked it up, players got really excited about it, and we spent about 3 months regularly releasing betas, open betas for players to try out the update that was coming on. This got players really excited for 3 months straight, and when it finally shipped, we reached a really big player spike. And we saw players return when the content actually launched. They were really excited about the content, and it really refreshed the experience. The content that dropped at that time was so big, it really refreshed the game entirely. Because of the new characters, because of some of the new features we had done. If players had not played the game in 6 months and came back at that point, they would have really seen a completely different game. Unfortunately, not everything turned out well, just like with the previous expansion. The image on the bottom right, those are our sales. The spikes on the left are the winter sale, and I think early February there was another sale on Steam at that point. And the spike on the right are the sales we got from actually doing a new release at that point. And it kind of matched the previous sales that we were doing, but this is something that we had completely in our own control. And the revenue it generated actually helped us keep developing the game for even longer. We're now committed to developing the game for another year at least, or probably even more. And this is all due to the revenue that we're generating from doing updates like these and releasing expansions this way. We released a second character bundle at that point, and it has really driven a lot of revenue for us. Unfortunately, we also see that whenever we release gameplay-relevant content, rather than purely cosmetic DLC, players get kind of frustrated. The backlash we get for releasing gameplay DLC compared to cosmetic DLC is much heavier, and the reviews you can see in the top right are actually reviews to the game itself. And so that kind of really affects our score, but in the end it does help us keep the game supported, so it's a trade-off that we have to make, unfortunately. What also really didn't help is that we called the narrative arc that lasted 6 or 9 months Awesomenauts Overdrive, and the expansion that we shipped as a paid content under the same name. So it really confused players as to what they were actually getting for free and what was paid content. And once that confusion existed within our community, it was not something that we could easily address. We spent months telling players what to expect and what was going to be free or paid. But even after all that time, the story of everything being paid, of a matchmaking update being paid, or new maps not being free, it persisted. So if you're ever going to do something like this, especially if you're shipping both free and paid content under the same name, I really recommend that you, as told yesterday as well, playtest your communication in a way. Try and reach out to players and see how they respond to your communication before actually shipping it to your entire community. And that brings us to today. We're still doing the updates, the named updates, and bundling the content. And we plan on doing the bigger narratives and talking about our vision over the next 6 or 9 months, and keep doing that. There is a lot of more cool stuff coming for Awesomenauts, and we plan on developing well into our 5th or even 6th year at this point. Also, we're still delivering on some of our old promises that we made originally. Even if they're 3 years late, we hope players are going to be really excited when the things finally launch. But we did really learn not to make more promises. And we're also not really announcing anything yet at this point. That kind of wraps it up for my part of the talk. Joost is going to come on in a minute and walk you through our actual patch process. So that's it, and thank you all for being here today.
Okay, so thank you, and welcome to the second half of our talk on Games as a Service. My name is Joost van Dongen. I'm one of the founders of Runimo and lead programmer. I'm also the writer of Joost's dev blog. I'm actually kind of curious. Can I see a show of hands? Who has ever read an article I wrote? Oh, nice. I see quite a couple of hands. Oh, I'm honored. Thanks. Okay, so Robin talked about our vision of Games as a Service, how we do marketing, how we reach players, those kinds of things. I'm going to talk about how we actually release a patch, how we develop it, what happens there, so the practical side of things. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through these steps. First, a little overview. Well, step 1, of course, is developing the new content. I'm not going to talk long about that. Then we do betas for a couple of weeks. Then launch week comes up, where we have a pretty tight schedule, where we do QA, release the patch on a Wednesday, always on a Wednesday in our case. Probably a hotfix a couple of days later, then a couple of weeks later, a balance patch, and finally a couple of months later, the content comes to console. So I'll explain all of these things. Okay, before I get to that, in case you've never actually released a patch on Steam, Steam is super awesome for doing patches. It's really easy. You basically just make a build on your hard disk, point Steam to that specific folder and say, well, this is the new version of the game. And then Steam figures out exactly what to do with it, what files have actually changed. It uploads it, and then you can just enable your patch whenever you're ready for it. So that's a super simple process. It's very fast. Once the patch is done, if it isn't too big, you can have it live like 10 minutes later, or sometimes even less. You can do several patches a day if you like. Players get the patch on the same day. If you screw up, you can revert your patch and go back to the previous version. These are all features of Steam, so that's really nice. And You can launch DLC yourself. You do need to ask Valve beforehand to have a look at your store page, but you can click the launch button yourself the moment you want to launch it. If you're only using Steam, then this may seem super obvious. If you've ever done console development, then you know that it isn't. On console, this is all super much harder. So yeah. Okay. The first step, when we're going to do a new patch, of course, we're going to figure out what we're going to put in it, what content. That's a combination of a lot of factors. Of course, our own ideas. We might have a lot of stuff that we wanted to do earlier, but we didn't get around to it, and maybe we can do it now. We are always checking what the community is asking for, what they're complaining about, so we can check there whether there's anything we want to pick up at this point. And we have a long-term vision, so it's not that we're only developing something for, okay, the next patch is in 2 months, we start on it now. Most things have a longer development arc than that, so we have several patches in development at the same time. Yeah. Okay, so I mentioned that we look at player feedback. Player feedback can be pretty rough. Players often don't separate emotion from fact, so if they just lost the game, then they're probably just really angry and they're going to write very angry things, like the one over there. This is quite a common type of comment, especially if you're doing a multiplayer game. Well, one part of that is that you need to figure out, okay, what's the underlying problem of this? But there's also the problem that players regularly disagree on what they want. So when a player posts something like this, you'll usually see another player who gets angry at him for having this opinion, because he has a different opinion. That makes it even more difficult to figure out what to do with something. And another aspect that we've noticed is that if you change something in the game, there's always someone who dislikes it. Whatever you change, if you add something, there's always someone who dislikes it. We even had players who complained that, well, this makes the game better for beginning players, and I don't want any new players because they suck. So I hate the game now. This is genuine feedback we've received. So in general, if you don't patch, then players complain that you're not doing anything. If you do patch, then they're complaining that you're doing something. So it's a difficult balance, and you should prepare yourself for that you need to grow a thick skin and not take these things too personally. Because if you read too much of it and you do take it personally, then you might end up throwing yourself off a bridge, I guess, which is not ideal. Okay, games as a service is awesome for balancing because you're doing a lot of patches. You can iterate on the balance, you can improve it all the time. You don't need to get the entire balance right before launch. We do, with every major patch, we also have a lot of balance changes. Astronauts is a big game with a lot of characters, a lot of balance parameters. So in a big patch, you can see as much as 6 pages of only balance tweaks. And that's excluding the actual new content in the patch. An important thing here is that you need to base this both on player feedback and on metrics. So you need to have a lot of metrics, collect those. And you really need that player feedback, because if players are actually going to play your games for hundreds of hours or even thousands of hours, then those players will be much better than anyone in the office. And if no one in the office is good enough to be in the top 1,000 players, then it's really difficult to judge balance for pro players. So yeah, you need to combine that with metrics and work on that. Now, perfect balance doesn't exist, I think. There's always balance is so complex that it might in theory exist, but in practice you'll never achieve perfect balance. But even if it did exist, and even if your game did have perfect balance, then you would still need to patch it and change the balance. That may seem really odd, but what we see is that over time players start to flock towards the same tactics. Usually they'll flock towards the overpowered tactics, but even if there aren't any overpowered tactics, they're discussing the game, they're figuring things out, teaching each other how to play the game, and they start doing the same things. And that makes the game stale, it makes it boring if you already know, oh, he's Lone Star, he's going to do this, because that's what the guide on Steam says, and every Lone Star in the game does that. So what we've noticed is that even if the balance of a part of the game seems good, we might still have to change it. A great example of this is when during a tournament, a team won the tournament with a new tactic that no one had tried up until that point. But the tactic had been possible for several months already, and once they had used it in the tournament, everyone knew about it and everyone was playing that tactic. And it was a bit of a lame tactic, so then we had to change the balance to get rid of that. Okay, so Feedback's really important, but it's also a difficult thing because players disagree so much, and even if you read a lot of feedback, give a lot of replies to the forum, to the community, they'll still complain that you're not communicating and how did you come up with this stupid idea. So we're currently working with this scheme for doing balance. One of our designers reads the forums, he discusses things with the community on Twitch, he does conference calls with some of the more hardcore players. Then he makes a list of whatever he wants to change, and then he puts that on Google Docs and allows players to type comments to each of the changes. And then, well, he has a look at those comments, he changes it again, iterates on that a bit, then he implements it, it goes into beta, and people play it, they give more feedback, changes it again, and then finally it gets into the final release. So as you can see, there are a lot of steps here where the community can give feedback, and all of that is to ensure that they know what's coming. Okay, so we develop actual new content. The major content is, of course, not balance changes. What we've seen is that if we release only balance changes, and even if it's 10 pages of balance changes, it doesn't bring back a single player. So you need something new. I'm not going to talk about actual development of content here. That's for a lot of other potential talks everywhere. So once the content is nearly done, we need to have it tested. Now, since we're doing big patches very regularly, it's really expensive to do extensive QA for that all the time. Like if you want to do a full QA on Awesomenauts, I don't know, that's maybe 10 QA people for a full week or even more than that. It's very expensive for a small studio like ours, so that's not something we can do. So our approach is to do as much of the QA through betas, and then have a little bit of paid QA near the end for specific things that we want tested professionally. So yeah, beta replaces a lot of paid QA. Okay, so if you're doing betas on Steam, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can do so. Well, you can do so outside Steam, of course. I wouldn't recommend that because Steam is very good at doing betas, but if your game hasn't launched yet, then that's something you could do. Before launch, you can also just do your betas on the main app and distribute some keys to players who want to try the beta. And then optionally, you can disable those keys when the game actually launches. Steam does not recommend doing this if you're going to spread a lot of keys, because the disabled keys will have some odd shop behaviors during the first couple of days after launch. Yeah, but those two are our tactics for before launch. And then once you've launched, there are 4 different ways that I know of that you can do a beta on Steam. And I'm going to walk you through each of those. We've all done all of these as well. One way is to have a completely separate Steam app and put your beta in there. As you can see here, this is my game list. It has both Awesomenauts and Awesomenauts Beta. We don't use this method anymore, but we did some 4 years ago. Since it's a completely separate application, players can enable or disable the download for it. They get the patches automatically for the beta patches. And an important thing to realize here is that it's completely separate from the main game. So that means that achievements, leaderboards, but also workshop items, they're not available cross-version. That can be good, because it means that if you have a bug that screws up your leaderboards, then that's not a problem. But it can also be bad, because if you want to test your achievements, if you set them up incorrectly in the beta, then you have a bug there, but not in the main game, or the other way around, and that makes testing more difficult. It makes it more difficult to figure out where the problem really is. So this way of doing things is also a cause of additional bugs, because you need to keep up Steamworks twice. Okay, the most common way to do betas on Steam is with a switchable Steam branch. You can right-click the game in Steam, go to Properties, then go to the Betas tab, and then a user can just select a different version of the game, and the Steam automatically downloads a patch to get to that version. This is a completely automated system in Steam. It works really well. When you release a patch, you can just click, okay, this is for the default version of the game, oh, this is for a beta. You can have several betas if you like. You can put them behind passwords if you want to limit access to them. Do note that hackers find a lot of info on Steam, so even though they're not able to get that version if it's behind a password, they might be able to get the name of it. We've had leaks because of these kinds of things. Yeah, this is the easiest way to do betas, but there's a big problem with it, and that is that whenever a user wants to try the beta, he needs to select the beta, then wait for the download, and then he can play it. If your download is like 500 megabytes, this can take quite long. And one thing we've seen is that users often say, yeah, I didn't try the beta because I had to wait for so long and it didn't feel like it. So we stopped doing this for that reason, because we want as many players as possible to try the beta, or at least for it to be easy for them to try the beta. Okay, this is the way we currently use for most betas. We put the beta live as a DLC, but it's a free DLC, and it's disabled by default. So if someone wants to try the beta, then he right-clicks the game again, goes to Properties in Steam, goes to the DLC tab, and he just enables the Beta Dual Load PC or Beta Dual Load Mac or Linux DLC, and then it automatically downloads. If a player does this, he has the entire game on his hard disk twice. The beta is just a subfolder of the main game. And if you do this, then both versions are updated by Steam. So if you release a beta patch, then users automatically download it, and they can really easily switch between the two. And if a user has both and he tries to start the game, then the game asks, well, which version do you want to start? Yeah, this is by far the easiest way, I think, for players to quickly switch between betas. We've been told by Valve that they like this kind of approach because it's something we can set up by ourselves entirely. We don't need to contact a Valve employee to do some custom work for us. And with the number of games launching on Steam right now, I think they've had their hair on fire quite enough. So they like not having their hair on fire more, I suppose. Then there's one other approach that we've used a couple of times. We used recently only, but a couple of times recently. And that's that it's similar to the beta in a DLC approach, but here everyone is forced to download it. And we have a switch in-game that forces you to start one of the two versions of the game. We use this when we really want the entire community to try a beta, but we only want to use it for a couple of hours. We have new matchmaking coming up. You cannot really test matchmaking with a small group of players. So we might enable this beta on a Monday morning and then disable it Monday afternoon when we have enough data gathered from the entire community, but only for a couple of hours. So the point of this method is that it allows us to switch really quickly, but it's also confusing for players because they get a new version and then suddenly they don't get a new version. And if there's any really rough bugs in there, then everyone will notice them, not just those who deliberately click the beta. Okay, so giving players access to beta, you can just allow them to use the beta for free. It's an open beta. This gives you the most players, is what we currently do. You can also have passwords if you want to limit a beta. You can also sell your beta. You can sell it as DLC on Steam, or you can sell it as a Kickstarter reward. That's the image you see here. This was the Iron tier in our Kickstarter. For $30, you got access to the betas. We kept doing it like this for about 2 years, and then we made the betas public for everyone. And this was one of the drivers of revenue during the Kickstarter. Having a good set of rewards is really important for doing a successful Kickstarter, and this is a really strong type of reward for players. Another thing to note is that even if a player has access to a beta, that doesn't mean he's actually going to try it. And one problem we have with that is that, okay, if we have new content, like we have a new character, players try the new character once, they give feedback, and then they don't start the beta again. So what we often see is that, okay, they tell us, oh, the new character is overpowered, you got to change this and this, and you got to change this to make it more fun. And then we make these changes, we put up a new beta, and then hardly anyone plays it. And a lot of players just read the beta patch notes and give their feedback based on that, which is not good. We want them to experience the game and not read about the game and then be angry that what they read isn't what they want. So what we see is that we often get stale feedback after the first round, and we take this into account. We try to never have things that really need big testing in a second round. We try to always have those in the first beta round. We do marketing around betas if we feel we need more players in the beta. And we might play the game on Twitch and then play against live players in the beta. This is a nice incentive for people to try to start the beta because everyone loves to be in the dev stream. Okay, so we've done a couple of betas. We're getting close to launch. This is the point where we start handling translations. We don't do them before this point because usually the changes we make in the beta might change the text as well. We found that a lot of players are very willing to help translate your game. And what we've done is for every language we have a bunch of people who are willing to help translate, and then when we have new translations needed, we put up a Google Doc with the texts, and we send a mail around to all those players who want to help. And they check each other's texts. This helps fix issues in case you would ever have malignant players who are translating your game. I think there has been a case of Minecraft having in the South African translation really bad swearing in the main menu. Which is difficult to catch, and that's why we always have several people check the text. And the main reward we give to players for doing this is this icon. In-game, it's a really tiny icon next to your name in the scoreboard and the leaderboards. It's the golden duck. And players are really eager to get it. They can get a golden duck through any type of helping us or helping the community, like the people who keep up the wiki or the moderators on the forum. They all get a golden duck, and this is highly sought after amongst our community. Okay, so another issue is when you're developing several things at the same time, and only some of them should release, you're going to want to split that in some way. Now, the obvious way to do that is to just branch them off. You have one branch in which you're developing a new character, another branch is for the new matchmaking, still another branch is for a spectator mode, I don't know, several different things. All of those are in development in parallel, and then when you want to do a patch, you merge those into the trunk. This is kind of the common way to handle this, and it's a good way to make sure that if you're adding any bugs in spectator mode because it's not finished yet, then those bugs will not influence the next patch you're doing that doesn't have that doesn't have spectator mode. Still, although this is a common way of doing things, we dislike it. One thing we've noticed is that we get a lot of conflicts if one of those versions has a big refactor in it. And another thing we've noticed is that it hides new content internally. Like an artist is working on something in his own branch, and then the programmer who's working on spectator mode doesn't bump into that content accidentally. And we think it's really great if you accidentally bump into other developers' content all the time, because that allows you to give more feedback and know better what the other people in the team are working on. Of course, you can switch your branch to look at that, but that's something that in practice you're not doing. And a lot of artists don't know how to switch branches themselves anyway. You'll have for this pretty complex command line stuff often. Okay, so 1 week before we actually launch a patch, we branch off the entire game into a separate branch so that any development after that doesn't influence the patch anymore. And then we do any fixes that are specific to the patch, we do in that branch. And we disable all the unfinished content. We develop it in such a way that we can easily do that. And when we do any hotfixes, we base them on that branch so that we don't get any bugs from other developments into the hotfix. A very relevant thing here is that if you have a lot of players, they like to hack your game and try to figure out whether there's any secrets in there. We've had a couple of cases where we had a nice marketing arc lined up where we're going to reveal stuff. And then a week before we would start that, someone found the actual textures in the game, unfinished art, and he posted that on the forum, and then there was nothing left to reveal for us because everyone had already seen it. So what we've done is we've made a little tool that automatically deletes all the content that belongs to certain, or all the assets that belong to certain content. And we updated that with whatever is in development and whatever should be released or not. Of course, that's its own source of bugs if you accidentally have the tool delete too much. Okay, so on the Friday before a patch launches, we have an external QA company do QA. It's a small team QA for 1 day, so it's very focused. We have to really pick our battles and choose which parts are relevant to test at that point. And we have an agreement with our QA company that we can always decide on a Monday before that we want that Friday to be the testing. So if development is delayed, then we can just do it another week. A very important thing for us in this whole process is to keep the round trip time as short as possible. We want to be able to do fixes and then have them live as quickly as possible. So yeah, that's why we have the QA on a Friday. And we only do this for really big releases because it's expensive to do so. Okay, so on Friday they found bugs. We fixed those on Monday to Wednesday. And then we do some limited testing internally, not too much. And then on Wednesday we can finally release the patch. So why do we release on a Wednesday? This is a very specific choice we've made. Well, we don't want to release in a weekend, because if there's any trouble, then we don't want our team to have to work during the weekends. For the same reason, we don't want to release on a Thursday or a Friday, because if the patch turns out to have a major bug, then we would need to come in during the weekend to fix it and have that hotfix live as quickly as possible. While if we release on a Wednesday, then we still have Thursday and Friday to make a hotfix. In general, if there's really bad stuff in the game, it's also really simple to fix. It's just, oh, I added the 0 too much to the damage of this character, something like that. Well, usually a bit more obscure, because of course we would find something like that, but it's usually easy to fix. We also don't do our patches on Tuesday, because our matchmaker relies a bit too much on Steam being stable, and on Tuesday Steam has server maintenance. And in the case of how we implemented our matchmaking, that means that whenever a server is reset, everyone who was in a match that was run on that had its game room on that server gets kicked out of the match. So players dislike Tuesdays for this reason, and so do we. And we also don't release a patch on Monday because that's the day before Tuesday. Okay, so the actual release of the patch, we can do everything ourselves. We just click release when we're ready for it. We can also click release on the DLC ourselves. We do this on Wednesday evening. That's Wednesday evening European time, and that's because at that time the Valve employees have arrived in the office. So if there's any drama, then we can ask them to help us. In general, we rarely need to use this, but in case something goes wrong really badly, it's really nice that we can actually reach Valve to help us. Yeah, but around releasing of a patch, we do a live stream. We do a live stream every Wednesday in general, and when we release a patch, what we usually do is we do a live stream, and then halfway through the live stream, we put the patch up so that people don't skip the live stream because they want to play the new content. And then during the second half of the live stream, we play the new content with live players. It's a lot of fun to do. It's a little bit of a celebratory thing for us. And it gets a lot of views because everyone is excited for the new content, and it's not live yet, so this is the best way to enjoy their excitement, I guess. Okay, so there are a couple of problems with releasing patches on Steam. It's not all roses and sunshine. I don't know whether that's a proverb in English, but I'll say it anyway. What we see is that about 1% or 0.1% of all players, I don't know an exact number, but this is the impression I get, gets a broken download, which means that some of the files on this hard disk are corrupted after we do a patch. The solution for that in general is that they need to right-click the game and do verify integrity of Steam cache. Steam then checks all the files and fixes them. And sometimes even that goes wrong. In some cases, even that goes wrong. So yeah, that kind of sucks. That means that we always get a couple of reports on crashes that we really can't do anything about. Also, for most players, the patch downloads as soon as they're not in any game. But for some players, it might take up to 24 hours, or maybe they even need to reboot Steam or their entire computer before the patch actually starts downloading. That means that after release of a patch, there's a period where players are playing different versions of your game simultaneously, because Steam doesn't kick players out of a game if a patch is released. So be sure to take care of that in your matchmaking, that you don't connect these players with each other, because that's a good way to get really weird crashes. Okay, so this is kind of our shame topic. Whenever we do a big patch, we practically always need to do a hotfix within 2 days after that. Astronauts is so complex by now that even several weeks of betas and paid QA and internal testing don't find all the issues that a patch has. Usually these quite obscure things or very specific tactics that turn out to be way too strong that no one thought of before the launch of the patch. Yeah, doing enough QA to really be 100% sure that we catch everything is totally unaffordable for us. So we've just accepted that with every patch, we do a hotfix within 2 days. So when we come in on Thursday morning, the programmers already know we're going to fix some bugs today, and then tomorrow we're going to do a build and release it. Of course, users dislike that we often launch content which has some bugs, but at the same time, they're really happy with how fast we do a hotfix, because doing a hotfix within 2 days or sometimes even 1 day, that's really fast. Okay, so a couple of weeks after that, we do a balance patch. Ideally, you would have got perfect or good enough balance during the beta already, but in practice, it turns out that how strong a new character or new content is not clear until it's been played a lot by the entire community. What we see is that even within the first couple of days after content has launched, we see a lot of balanced feedback from players, but that feedback might be totally the opposite of what you see a couple of weeks later. A nice example is this character here, X the Interloper. When he released, for the first couple of days, the community seemed to agree that his balance was in a really good spot and that we finally did a good job for once. And then 2 weeks later, all hell broke loose because they all agreed that we had done a really horrible job and his balance was really bad. So yeah, we always need to wait a little while before we get the good feedback. Yeah. Okay, so it's live on Steam now. We've done patches. The content is good. We're happy. Not until that point do we actually start development of a console patch. Now, if you've ever done console development, then you know that if you want to release anything, then you need to go through certification. Certification can take around a week. and you can't launch until that's done. In practice, it usually takes about 2 weeks from the moment you're finished until the moment you can actually release your new patch. And that makes the whole thing of, oh, we do a hotfix within 2 days, that's a really bad idea if you cannot do that quickly. Also, if you're adding new paid DLC, it gets even worse because you need to set up the stores in European and American regions, maybe also Asian regions if you're selling there as well. And practice is you need to go through a lot of bureaucracy. And 2 weeks is the theoretical minimum, but in practice it usually takes 4 weeks to have all the stores have their content ready and be aligned to release at the right moment. Another challenge on consoles is that there's no easy way to do betas. There's been a bit of a shift there where more options are appearing, but in practice it's probably best to assume you cannot do any kind of relevant beta on console. So yeah, the whole idea of our working process for patches is that we have these short turnarounds and we want to use that. We cannot use that on console, so what we basically do is use Steam as the main platform and then don't bring the content to console until it's been iterated on Steam live and we're really sure that the content is good and that the balance is good. There are no really bad exploits and we can release it. This means that we don't start developing a console patch until weeks after the content released on Steam. And the actual release of the patch is usually months later. Unfortunately, of course, our console players really hate this. They see new content on Steam, they see all the marketing for it on our Facebook and stuff like that, and they know that they won't be able to play it for a while. But yeah, we've been looking into this a lot, but we don't see any reasonable way to do this any better without spending enormous amounts of money on this. Keep in mind that some games that supposedly have much faster patching on console, our players tell us that, for example, Smite is really good at this. But I've also read online that they have like 150 people in that team, which is 10 times as many as we do. So yeah, their budgets and their constraints are very different. Okay, so that brings me to the conclusion of the talk. So most important thing to me is developing for a live game is a lot of fun. In some cases, we think of a new feature and it's live a couple of days later or a couple of months later. And it's just a very fun way of developing a game. It's, yeah, that's a major thing for us. The other thing, as Robin showed, games as a service can provide continuous income. Instead of having one big splash of money once every 2 years, you have money every month. You have a much better idea of what's going on. So if you actually have a hit, then especially games as a service is a really good way to keep your studio going. But even if it's not a hit, I've been told that Abby, the developers of Renowned Explorers, the game didn't sell very well at launch, but they kept supporting it for quite a while, and by now it actually sold pretty well, and they're really happy with it as a studio. So even if your game is not a hit at launch, games as a service can save it in the long run. Yeah, Steam is awesome for games as a service. It has a lot of features that really help you do these things. It's important to think about whether you want to do games as a service before you launch and maybe have some content that you're not releasing at launch. There's also a great example of one of the last things. Learn how to communicate with the community. Some things you can tell the community, some things you can't. Don't make too many promises. But also in case of having content finished at launch that you're not releasing, that's probably something you don't want to communicate with your community. So that's something you don't want to communicate, but at the same time, in many cases, when it comes to explaining what you're doing and asking your community what they're talking about, those are points where you can't communicate enough. So don't promise anything, but do explain what you're doing, and do ask them, oh, why are you so angry? What's the problem here? So yeah, we group content into bigger patches, really important for us. And we use betas a lot. And we've developed a thick skin so that we don't throw ourselves off bridges too often. Okay, so if we're not going to do a QA on stage right now, but if you want to ask some questions, feel free to come up to Robin or me or ask them, or send us an email. Our email addresses are up there. As I mentioned, I have a dev blog where I write a lot about game development. There's a lot of posts about Awesomenauts there. So have a look there if you're interested to read more. And yeah, thank you very much.